Let's start today's session. So I welcome you all again. Over the previous two sessions, we have emphasized upon the interlinking aspect and how we can better interlink, better interpret the topics and add somewhat heft in our answers. I see that many of you are not writing the answers. Hi Ane, good afternoon. So Ane has been consistent, so is Saurabh, but many of you are not writing the answers as yet. So the substantive part of the test series, you can hold on to a bit for about 4 or 5 days, etc., and then you can start it in a rapid mode. But the daily answers, the idea is that you reinforce the learning that we are deriving in the class. Okay, so that is something that I want to emphasize. Next unit that we are going to deal with as part of our PABAD Advance is going to be the development dynamics, or we can say DPA, Development Public Administration, okay, or DA. I hope you all understand the fact that I am not going to get into the very elementary aspects, right? You haven't written the questions, Divyanshi. Do upload that. So the point is that I'm not going to get into the ABC aspect of the topic as in what is development, right? But I will give some perspectives of scholars that you can use in the examination to get some brownie points. Okay? Administration of development, development of administration. Again, this is an area which is emphasized by UPSC time and again. Sometimes explicitly and sometimes implicitly. But it is very much the part of the DNA in terms of how UPSC positions its questions. So, just like every class, we are going to refer to certain PYQs and see and feel and highlight the high yield areas. Okay, the high yield areas. Remember, the concept of development remains central. It will be utilized at multiple places. Okay, if we look at the profile of the development dynamics and the questions that have been asked, bureaucracy versus development, the topic bureaucracy and development. Also, the idea of the women and the self-help groups. Because you see, the questions when we talk about topics like bureaucracy and self-help groups, they are very, very GS-ish, if I say. And therefore, a common perception is that it is very easy. It is easy. But not easy the way you are thinking it is easy. That I can write a GS-ish answer and get away with it. So this intricacy has to be tapped by you. Whenever you are talking about such topics which seem generic, here it is all the more need to emphasize the pub-adish element. Also, we'll be taking up certain theories so as to add the scholarly perspective. Have you read Wiedner in development? You've read it? Riggs? Pada? Okay. No, I'm talking about Riggs vis-a-vis development. I'm not talking about Riggs or Wiedner like that. I'm talking about Riggs vis-a-vis development, Riggsian view on development. So the moment you add these things, they add a heft, because you see many of the questions will remain abstract and it will have a combination of one or more elements. Okay, like this, there is a topic of state versus market debate, and this is closely linked to the impact of LPG. I guess we have dealt with the LPG in a very exhaustive manner. I mean, that is more than the required perspective that is there. So I'll not be harping upon it, but I'll be invoking it. Okay, so that is something which is there. Also, the changing profile of development. But largely, please bear in mind that the questions can be abstract. And let me give you certain examples of it. Okay. 2020, a 15 marker. And this is paper 1. Affirmative action in socio-economic development has not altogether eliminated discrimination. Discuss it in the context of women empowerment. So if I look at it, it is referring to affirmative action, linking it to socio-economic development. That's the secular idea which it is giving, and it is saying that it has not eliminated discrimination. See, the way I am deconstructing the question, you can also do it. It helps you identify the locus and focus of the question, and all of it has to be looked at from the perspective of women empowerment. Remember, the reservation bill for women in parliament has been passed. Okay, so UPSC has a habit of touching upon such topics. So whenever you do this affirmative action, socio-economic development, discrimination, we are not talking about class discrimination, caste discrimination, gender discrimination, linguistic discrimination. We are not talking about this. This can be asked in relation to, let us say, a scheme. For example, particularly vulnerable tribal groups, children, or altogether a similar format regarding climate and sustainability. Because all of it has now become the part of development discourse. So this is where the fulcrum of your conceptual analysis will lay, where the meaning of development, right, affirmative action, and how it is a means to bring about socio-economic development and why it failed. Now here you must use to make this answer pabadish, because women empowerment SHG part will remain the same. Herein you will have to use people like Riggs, Weidner. For example, when Riggs talk about differentiation, prismatic societies. Yesterday we took up an idea that how the throughput of the NPM can enable the Western world to deal with the prismatic elements within their society. Okay, so these aspects have to be dealt with. Again, a very abstract question. This is just to give you a roadmap, right? We'll be studying, I'll be giving the questions, and then you'll be writing the answers. Collaboration and its cognates of public service delivery need to be viewed from governance lenses. है ना, abstract है ना? Collaboration and its cognates. So while if I can pick up some words, the collaboration and cognates, okay, public service delivery, and it needs to be viewed from the governance lens. See, the way we are deconstructing the question, even if you will draw this figure and add the how and why and what elements, even in this figure, just after your introduction, before the body and the substantive analysis, it will immediately convey that you know what the question is asking. Okay, so that means the collaboration cannot be any collaboration. It has to be viewed from the governance lens. That means the philosophy of the governance should be the binding thread of that collaboration. Okay, another abstract question, 2021. Gender equality and women rights have laid a strong foundation of development. Simple thing. So remember, while we'll be using the scholarly definitions of development for giving it the pubadish touch, at the same time we have to broaden the horizon and refer to definitions by, let us say, people like Dr. Amartya Sen. Okay, the political school of development I am referring to. I hope you know what I mean. Okay, so that is something that we will have to talk about, because gender equality, women rights, then you will have to look at the development through its spectrum: political, social, economical, cultural, and justify that. Now, it can get a tad bit difficult for you to encapsulate so much in the answer, because like this question, it's a 10 marker. So here in the representation will help. For example, women empowerment, what the question is saying, gender equity and women rights. If gender equity and women rights are enhanced, they lead to enhanced political representation / activism. Simple si baat hai. So with diagrams like these, and you can box your analysis in 4 or 5 lines. So you will be able to justify the word limit as well as convey the entire thing to the examiner. Okay, so there will be lot of abstract questions like this. Another one is a 20 marker. It was asked in 2021. The successful attainment of SDGs objectives, Sustainable Developmental Goals, largely depends upon wisdom, experience, and far-sightedness of the actors involved, and their willingness to cooperate in the implementation process. Now tell me a good example of this. Swachh Bharat Mission is one, but again I would say a far more broad-based example, because implementation is being talked about, and remember, wisdom, experience, far-sightedness. Can the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile trinity, direct benefit transfer? I mean, Swachh Bharat is not incorrect, but it's more appropriate because it fits into the criteria SDG. Also, aspirational district program, aspirational blocks program. Right? So the moment you start thinking like this, see, it is ultimately a game of thinking. All of you have studied, you all are bright fellows. Okay. It's how, rapidly and how, in how much creative manner actually you can visualize the question. Okay. Mission life again would be somewhat narrow. No, not narrow, right? Mission life would suffice. Okay. All right. So this is how you need to think. Now let us look deeper from the conceptual angles, and then we'll build the interlinkages. The idea to present you with these PYQs and the abstract question was to set the tone so that you understand the dimensionality in which we need to deal with this. Marks is something that I have talked about in the first session itself. Okay. So the concept of development is a topic that has multiple meanings. You talk to multiple people, they'll give you multiple meanings of development. But Wiedner, our very own Wiedner, actually defines it as a state of mind, a tendency, and a direction, rather than a fixed goal. Rather than a fixed goal. It is a rate of change in a particular direction. It is the rate of change in a particular direction. Now please understand, when we talk about bureaucracy versus and development, we often say that bureaucracy is static. And we often say development is dynamic. And most of you end the argument there itself. Regarding this particular point, how about with bureaucracy, you mention somebody like Morstein, Marx or Weber. इसको सोच के देखो. We have to play with this, understand. खेलना है हमें अब इसके साथ. Concepts हम जानते हैं. We all know the concepts. So I say bureaucracy static as Weberian bureaucracy is rule bound, rational, hierarchical, etc. Fixed, resistant to change. Put Weber's definition of bureaucracy. And the dynamic aspect, put Wiedner. Immediately you elevate or you end up elevating a generic point to a more pabadish point. Okay, so this is how you should think. Similarly, John Montgomery puts development as an aspect of change. An aspect of change that is desirable, broadly predicted or planned, or at least influenced by governmental action. Now tell me, if I say that you talk about development from a policy point of view, wouldn't this definition fit there? That development is can be taken up as an aspect of change that is desirable, broadly predicted or planned, or it is at least influenced by the governmental action. Okay, so the moment we talk about this, we are looking at the policy view of public administration or not. So if I give a statement that the policy approach towards public administration is an approach to development, comment. समझ में आएगा? So things like that, you will have to start thinking on these lines. Then rigs, our very own rigs. So the Rigsian view is a process of increasing autonomy. A process of increasing autonomy, that is discretion of social systems made possible by rising levels of diffraction, Now this is an idea which will fit both in classical sense as well as in the contemporary sense. Now read the statement very carefully. Increasing level of autonomy in social systems made possible by rising level of diffraction. So the classical idea would here be that the rising level of diffraction, that means the clear division of labor, clear division of specializations. Classical idea. But it is actually looking at the society from the societal lens. So a more contemporary idea as well. So the system acts in a far more autonomous manner with respect to the environment. If I take this idea, the Rigsian idea, and put it in the organizational context, what is an organization? A simple group of people coming together to realize a certain goals, objectives defined by certain rules, procedure, etc. Now, if I am talking about organizational development, am I looking at hierarchical organizations or more flatter? लगा ना रिक्स का idea? Because the organization is also a social system. Okay, so that is how we will be strategically placing these things and linking these things up. ठीक है? So far, any doubts? Friends watching this online, any doubts whatsoever so far? And I've just touched upon the tip of the iceberg. Friends watching us online, any doubts? Okay. You see, interestingly, while the idea of development or development, if I look at as an English word, it is something which is very old, but the concept of development administration, interestingly, was coined by an Indian. पता थी ये बात? नहीं? It was coined by an Indian scholar, Goswami. Okay, in 1955. But the larger concept was talked about, elaborated, theorized upon initially by Whedon. And later on, of course, Riggs and others followed. If I look at the development administration and we are looking at it I mean, we are looking the development administration with the lens of public administration. Then, at the crux of it, if we look at it, it is all about a government or administration influenced change. Change for better, of course. Okay? Better what? Better society, better economy, better infrastructure. So, better across the socio-political, cultural, economic landscape or the attainment of those goals. Okay. The idea that development and administration is two words coming together is for the fact that it is an organized effort. Okay. It is an organized effort, integrated, directed. Planned, organized, coordinated. Link kar pa rahe ho? So the because the organization is there, the administration is there, and yes, the periphery of the administration is dynamic. But we have learned that the core of the administration, Wilson said administration is administration, there is nothing public or private about it. No, pure. So the point is this, that the core aspect still remains the same. But when you are looking at the dynamic concept of development from a static point of view of administration, then you are actually here looking at the political commitment. So the political school of public administration comes into the picture, enter the political school. So you are looking at a political commitment to those goals. ये बात समझ में आई है? Understood? Any doubt, any iota of doubt, don't go back to your places with any doubt. Okay. But if we look at development as a secular concept, it has far wider, far multidimensional connotations, which we talked about initially. Okay. And again, the scholars of public administration across the discipline, because there are a lot many sociologists, even psychologists, political scientists that we actually bring into the sphere of public administration. Okay. So we will have to look at what these scholars are saying. Basically, if you are looking at from the societal point of view, social point of view, then Martin Landau. Martin Landau, Landau. He calls it the engineering of social change. The engineering of social change. So the moment the engineering aspect has come into the picture, that means there is a scientific orientation, one. Two, there is an element of direction. So it's a directional process. Okay? Wiedner also quotes, and I'll quote Wiedner, DA is concerned with maximizing innovation for development. That means development is a secular idea. Please understand this. When you apply administration to it, it becomes development administration. So, the DA is all about innovation to bring about development. If we are taking a structural view, organizational view, it is the organization to bring about development, the earlier one that we talked about. So, these interpretations should be very, very clear to you. Okay? Then development of administration and administration of development. Okay, this is something that I am not going to touch because this is well read, well explored. But still, if you have any queries, we are keeping a mentorship on coming Monday, right? So do ask in that. Now we'll be looking at far more analytical area where we are looking at the differences between the TA, that is traditional administration, and the DA, that is development administration. Okay, now I want you to take the leaf out of the discussion that we did vis-a-vis the coming up of NPM and rather NPA and the traditional public administration. I talked about a question where there was that the traditional administration or the classical administration focused on the administration, whereas the new public administration focused on the public. Now the same analogy fits here. है कि नहीं? TA was focused on administration, processes, universalization, systematization, rules, regulations, principles. Whereas the DA is focused on public, how to enhance goods and service delivery, what is the level of society, how society is taking it up. So ये difference याद रखना. In a nutshell, if somebody in a one-liner wherein you will have to write that the TA focused on administration, the DA focused on public. ठीक है. So the purpose, structure, organization, attitude, capabilities, models and techniques that we actually see both TA and DA with differ. Okay, that means TA is far more dynamic in its orientation and its scope, whereas the TA was far more inward looking, right, static. DA can be a personal, so you can here now link ideas like neo-localism. Okay, bottom-up approaches. वो यहाँ link होंगी. Whereas the top-down approach will come here. You have to follow the structure. Here we are looking at the dynamism in the society. Okay, so the requirements differ in terms of link it with civil service. Okay, the TA required the personnel or the functionaries in the organization to adhere to those organizational norms with very little discretion, with very little autonomy, with very little scope to bring about change. Whereas in DA, you need far more innovation, far more creativity. So altogether DA, the requirements on the bureaucracy and the requirements on the administration differ. You need to be far more imaginative, solution oriented. Now administrative reforms, link करते हैं इसको, ठीक है? And I keep referring to Karma Yogi. From rules to roles. आया मजा इसमें? समझ में आ रहा है ये चीज? So what it is doing? It is reorienting the administration from TA to DA. Now, if there is a question regarding administrative reforms, a vague question, and you add this perspective, it will elevate your answer. तो ये छोटी छोटी चीजें हैं. Like I said, हमें खेलना, we have to play, but make sure you don't play with your eyes and brains closed. ठीक है, कुछ ऐसा ना हो जो बिल्कुल illogical लगे. Different perspective, but in the same path. Right. Okay. So therefore there is need. Now link it with administrative values. Ethics का bonus portion इस session में. Empathy, compassion, citizen-centric administration, सब कुछ यहाँ आ रहा है. ठीक है, अब समझ में आ रही है बात? लिंक कर पा रहे हो इसे? कोई दिक्कत, any problem? So the administration, when here we are talking about administration in its true sense. That is the fused sense, not the dichotomical sense. Because we talked about how DA is ultimately the political will or the politically induced process to bring about the change. So it will be there across the body of the state, the executive, legislature, judiciary and the bureaucracy. ठीक है. So in pointers, let me tell you certain pointers. So the TA is about routine operations which are performed in a rigid manner, whereas DA is about new tasks. And DA is far more, or should be far more, ecologically sensitive. So please understand, hear me out. एक बात ये सुनो. So don't you think that with the traditional academic paradigms which dictated how PA, that is public administration, should be, after the NPM era, it's not a clear on-off switch, but with the coming up of NPA era, increasingly, the elements related to DA are shaping PA. More ecological, as simple as that. More ecological. But look at how I interpreted it in the evolution chain. Okay? So you have to think like that. Alright, so TA is actually routine operations performed in a rigid manner, and DA is new tasks and ecologically far more responsive. That means it is far more responsive to the changing environment. The thrust factors or the stresses given in TA on efficiency, economy, individual performance, whereas DA is far more holistic, composite, because it stresses on organizational growth and effectiveness. The stress is on group to group collaboration and group performance. Understood? TA has centralized decision making, whereas DA has a widely shared decision making. But remember, DA, when we talk about widespread decision making, we are not talking about vague or unorganized decision making. This is a caveat which you should add here. Even in DA, while the decision making is spread and shared, still it does not happen by sacrificing the empirical approach and the technological aids that are available. They are very much there. Otherwise, what will happen? The rationality part will get eroded. The framework for TA is rigid, hierarchical structure, whereas the structures that we found in DA are flexible, malleable, constantly changing roles. In TA, there is obsession with rules and procedures. In DA, it is ultimately high performance standards, high development standards that matter. Therefore, you see, while the TA is risk averse, a good DA should be risk oriented, innovation oriented. TA is status quoist. DA is dynamic and change oriented. Now please understand, here I want to draw a thread. The thread is, when we talk about bureaucracy and development debate, one aspect is the conceptual debate, how they are different. The other aspect is the practical idea that how they are complementary, right? So when we say how they are different, TA is what? Bureaucracy. So same arguments you can use there. Now recall your notes. You would not have made notes like this, the way I am explaining. And this is the advanced learning that we, okay. So similar thing you can use there. See, the idea is, when we say less is more, how in the span of next 3 weeks or so, with the limited learning, we can utilize it for the mains examination to the maximum benefit. Okay, तभी तो इन classes का कुछ मतलब है ना? Okay, more. Status quoist and dynamic I talked about. So the TA can be labeled as a closed system, whereas the DA can be labeled as a open system. So in a closed system is also largely inward, whereas an open system is far more permeable. You have linkages with from ground to up, specialized linkages as well as the generalized linkages. The TA is more about quantitative goals, whereas the DA is more about qualitative goals. But you see, some scholars actually criticize looking at administration and development from the lens of TA and DA. They say that it is like dividing the administration between developers and non-developers, which for academic study might be fine, but in practical reality, both combine. The name of the scholar is W. Wood. The name of the scholar is W. Wood. That this dichotomy is not needed because both are needed. So when you talk about the integration of bureaucracy and administration in the debate, you can quote Wood. Okay? While there is a third view which says that PA, TA and DA is a part of it. DA is not distinct, but it's a part of it. Now, when you look at this DA in different political, social, cultural, geographical, economical contexts, then you find a different analysis. For example, in a country like India, if you look at both TA and DA, they have a lot of commonality. For example, the common source of authority, the responsibility of the cabinet to the legislature, office of district collector is both an example of TA and DA together. Okay. And the perception when you are looking at the citizen administration interface, how does the citizen perceive? Does citizen perceive it, okay, this is DA and that is TA? No. For citizen, the administration remains a single entity. And hence, for theoretical analysis, we can use the TA and TA. But in developing countries, especially in Indian context, TA and DA, there is no distinction. Both are needed. So while the TA, the traditional functions, law and order maintenance, basic record maintenance, office procedures, etc., they are there. But they continue to be there. They are not getting replaced by coming up of DA. Rather, DA actually thrives on PA or TA. How? Because without law and order, which is a TA function, you cannot have a DA. Without a TA, normal budgeting, you cannot have a DA. Okay. Understood? Any doubts whatsoever? Friends watching us online, any doubts? We linked it. We linked it initially, when we talked about TA. Not we can, we must rather see it in that light. Okay. ठीक है, clear है ना? Okay. Now, please understand, while we are looking at the DA, it is important to develop a basic perspective of DA in light of various contexts. Political context, social context, economic context. Though in our discussion that we have had today, we have linked it, but somewhat specific linkage is needed. You see, what does DA is about? DA is about action orientation. Okay, it is ultimately the action orientation, the goal orientation. Okay. Now, a part of DA is also the idea of modernization, socio-economic development, institution building. And these are the essential part of DA, because without it, without the institution building, socio-economic development, the administration part would be, if I remove this, the administration gets removed from the picture. है ना? So this is something which is important. Also, if you look at the 4 P's, plan, politics, okay, programs and projects. This has become an essential part of DA. And these actually form the crux of this action orientation, goal orientation or not. Now the profile changes. CPA. The developed West, it will be far more evenly distributed. Whereas in a developing country, the political and the economic context will be far more heavy. Okay. So that is there. Now, when you look at the DA with the political lens, so we are looking at the political context. See, through this I am touching upon various debates related to DA. So we might not deal with, like I said, development of administration, administration of development and anti-development thesis and all those things, because we are bringing this together where we talked about you can link the DA, you can link the anti-development thesis there, okay, just like we link neo-localism, etc. So when you talk about political context, which are the principal entities? Your political parties, interest groups, legislatures, court, the electorate, and to this Riggs actually point out in relation to the DA in its political context that these are the very fundamental prerequisites. Why? Now understand, take this, rewind. When we say that the politics, interest groups, laws, courts, judiciary, legislature, electoral process, electorate, they play a very essential role and they are fundamental to DA. When Riggs was talking about in 60s, while developing CPA models, regarding whom? Regarding the newly developed, newly independent countries, developing world. That is why you see the political character and the economic character getting heavy in the developing world when we talk about DA. So that is the political lens that we are talking about. But ultimately, the qualitative aspects of DA will depend on how these things and the administration is able to provide the quality. Now, link it with personnel administration training, capacity building. Okay, so this will get pinned there. One side we are looking at CPA, other side we are looking at the personnel administration to bring about the development. Because that is the goal of the administration today. Even PA, personnel administration, has also evolved, no? Even if we look at India's trajectory, earlier they were simply the bureaucrats. But with the changing times, their goals have evolved. Pre-independence, there were different goals. Post-independence, the welfareism comes. Then, other things come. Also in the larger historical timeline, if you see, from laissez-faire, monarchies, then to the welfare, to the new neoliberal state and all those things. So that is where you can pin it. Okay. So, while the bureaucracy is a hierarchical organization, okay, but in the context of DA, it serves as an agent for the change. While the bureaucracy engages in administrative functions to bring about improvement in performance, efficiency, effectiveness, economy. All this improvement translates to better goal attainment and hence better development. And this is simply what? Better deal. Okay. But since the bureaucracy is so central to the DA, in countries which are in the early stages of development, these very bureaucracies end up acquiring a lot of power and control of resources, which leads to abuse of power and discretion, and hence the corruption and the elitism in the bureaucracy. Okay. So this is another aspect. Now, in the modern day NPM governance, good governance era, this exercise of bureaucratic power gets checked or it gets neutralized, or this misuse of bureaucratic power gets neutralized by the extra bureaucratic elements, or it is balanced by the extra bureaucratic elements like your legislature. Okay, electoral system, party system, and any effective government, any effective state would require that balance. So that is there in the traditional sense. In the NPM, NPA, good governance era, more actors will be added. For example, civil society, media, nowadays even social media or new media as we call it. Okay, कहाँ जुड़ रहा है ये जाके? Accountability and control. More accountability is asked. So the actions cannot be whimsical. Okay. So these extra bureaucratic entities actually exercise power. You see, anywhere you see. Okay. State emergency, coalition government, weak extra bureaucratic institutions, because the political activity is largely in animated suspension. The bureaucracy gets power. है ना? So problem, the syllabus head, administration in coalition regimes. अब लॉजिक समझ में आ रहा है वो कहां से बिल्डअप हो रहा है, right? So these conceptual arguments can be added there. हम ऐसे ही हर क्लास में, in every class, we'll take up a topic, but we'll try and find as many branching as possible with our syllabus. Okay. So this balance is essential. And therefore you see public policy. Consultative policy is the best policy. Evidence-based policy is a best policy. So therefore we are talking about newer ideas that evidence-based policy making, far more consultative, widespread consultative processes are followed. Why? Because it provides that much needed balance that we are actually talking about. So therefore the thrust of the public policy for DA should be on this aspect. And this also in a broader sense will help maintain the balance between the politics and administration. ले जाओ इसे dichotomy पे, Wilson and fusion पे. ठीक है? समझ में आ गया? Okay. So in the political context with respect to DA, it is essential that we strengthen and improve both the political as well as the bureaucratic forces which are at play, so that better development goals can be realized. Hanji. Now flip through the pages and let me know that have you understood all this? Friends watching us online, have you all understood this? क्या चाहिए सौरभ? डब्ल्यू वुड का स्टेटमेंट चाहिए. So see, Saurabh, scholars like Wood are actually against the division or demarcation of the TA and DA. They say that when we create such a dichotomy, that means the entire administration, the entire government servants are divided into developers and non-developers. So some of them will gain esteem and some of them will not gain esteem. And it will lead to demoralization. Understood, Saurabh? Okay. Anay, understood? Friends, understood? Should we move on to the next? कहीं कोई प्रॉब्लम आए, कहीं कुछ समझ नहीं आ रहा, ask me then and there. Okay. Now, let us look at the economic context. You see, सीधी सी बात है, very straightforward. The development cannot happen without a budget or money or economic base. Okay? So in this aspect, Riggs makes a very important point in the case of economic context of the DA. He says that the level of economic production must be high enough, not only to cover, not enough, high enough to cover not only the consumption needs, not only the consumption needs of primary producers, but also to support an army of employees, an army of employees, both public and private. Because these very, other people that we are talking about, right, they are into the secondary and tertiary space. So the economic context is fairly simple, that you have to, in a nutshell, if I put it down, you have to increase your GNP. gross national produce or product. Okay. Then we are linking the idea of DA with economic development. That means that when we are looking at DA from the economic lens or economic context and we are linking it with the idea of economic development, then which factors will be taken care of? Industrial production, human and natural resources, capital, etc. We'll be looking at economic factors only. Also, this very economic development, taking leave from what Riggs said, this economic growth and development has to foot the bill, or it should be so much that it should foot the bill of the bureaucracy that is carrying it out, as well as to create that surplus, that extra thing that we were talking about for the larger society. So can we say that the concept of economic development or the economic context of DA is myopic? Both yes and no. Yes, because it is looking at only the economic angle, not other angles. No, because it is looking at economic development as a means to bring about the larger development or the larger change. Yes, economic development looked at from the limited lens of economic growth, that is problematic. You have to look at the distribution of that economic growth. Include the concept of inclusive growth. Now, when you have to look at the sustainability of that, include the concept of sustainable growth or sustainable development. Okay. So, it has to meet the expenses of the bureaucracy itself and the other aspects. Okay. So, economic development entails not only the conditions, but it also provides the economic control over the bureaucrats. Because the country which will have, the nation or the state which will have good economic growth will build a strong and a high capacity bureaucracy or development administration. And that is a high capacity, highly trained, highly professional bureaucracy will create more development. So this is a virtuous cycle. So wherever you see the economy has not reached at a minimum level where this virtuous cycle can start, the levels of development remain low. ठीक है? That is why you see reduced productivity, regression, you will see political strife in those. I mean, what happened in Mexico recently or what happened in Kenya recently, this is a manifestation of this. Okay. समझ में आ गया? Any doubt whatsoever? ठीक. Next, we will take up the social context. Why I am giving you these context is for the fact that the questions can be really abstract. They will ask you to talk about society and stuff like that.
These contexts are not directly asked, not directly mentioned.
No, they are not neither directly asked, neither they are directly mentioned. But the knowledge of it, you see how it links these things. They help you to answer better. वरना तो उसके अंदर तो है ही नहीं कुछ. Just the concept of development है. What is development administration? Administration of development. Anti-development thesis. Bureaucracy, democracy. यही तो है. Bureaucracy and development. But it is the application orientation which you will need.
So if there is an angle of economic context in some question, not directly, but if we have mentioned it, so we can give a scholarly basis by Riggs statement.
और क्या? इसीलिए तो है. इसीलिए तो है. तभी तो रिग्स दे रहा हूं मैं आपको इस चीज को. वरना वो बहुत जेनरिक, वो जीएस का आंसर हो जाएगा. ठीक है. and that actually conveys the basic, the logical basic, because all of this is logical. Okay, so that conceptual grounding will be provided. ठीक है जी, नेक्स्ट देखते हैं सोशल कॉन्टेक्स्ट. Whenever we talk about development, development is what? In a nutshell, if I look it from the social lens, it is nothing but an improvement in the social welfare. Okay, they want us to watch Netflix. What happened just? Crazy stuff. Okay, so it is ultimately about the improvement or enhancement of the social welfare. Now, what entails? You want to say something?
Sir, in an economic context, can Arshak also
Bilkul, bilkul. Look at the way how the document or the treatise has been framed. Arthashastra. No, it's not majorly based. It's a treatise on Arthashastra. But if you look at I'm sorry, the Arthashastra, a significant focus is on how the money and the finance and the resources move, and they drive the kind of administration. You need resources. There are other things. You need resources, you need communication, you need laws, rules. Therefore, those Mauryan edicts which were there, all of those features are there. You can absolutely link Arthashastra, and you must rather. Arthashastra, you will find a lot of things. You will find concepts related to economy, then you will find concepts related to the IR, mandala theory, and all those things. Personnel management. So every aspect of administration. That is why it's called as a grand treatise on administration. Interestingly, Chanakya or Kautilya was called as the Machiavelli of East, but he predated Machiavelli. Rather, Machiavelli should be called as Chanakya of the West. But we have had a colonial past. Okay. So the point is this, that it is related to the improvement in the social welfare. So whenever I talk about social welfare, what all things do I entail? Health services, education, housing, cultural amenities, right? Protection of every individual, whether it is minority, linguistic, religious, lack of discrimination in the social sphere, women, human rights, etc., etc. Now, you see, link it like this. Okay. Social lens. With this, I am looking at PA. With this, I am looking at DA. And when I am talking about all these things, managing of cultural amenities, not just the construction of the hospitals, but to ensure that the healthcare is available to all. Availability, accessibility, reliability, sustainability, affordability, all those abilities. And if I look at the remit of public administration and look at it from P1 to the PP, that is paradigm 1 to paradigm present, isn't the DA as we see today in the social context emblematic of the expanded scope of public administration? Isn't this actually proving true? Basically, what I'm trying to do here is LHS is equals to RHS kind of argument. Okay, that's what we do in mathematics, right? So the idea is that when we are looking at the public administration and development administration from social lens, it is so wide, diverse. Okay, because it will include all of it. Regulation of labor, provision of social security, whatnot. Okay. So in a democratic developing society, DA gets triggered, or DA in a way gets into action because of these social pressures which exist and the organizations and the institutions within that society, whether that's political party, interest groups or whatnot. Okay. So these are the formal organizations, the legislature, political parties, private corporations, etc. So these formal organizations actually take up this goals. But of lately, if you will see, and this can be added into the changing profile of development. The changing profile of the development. These very formal organizations, with the passage of time in the larger context of PADA, have started actually working for vested interests. Yes or no? No. You see, political parties, legislature, etc., all of them were the agents in the DA, part of the social reality, and DA used to get triggered because of their impetus. But of lately, with the passage of time, these formal organizations have actually started to serve their own interest, inward looking. They are actually looking at serving the interest of their leaders, okay, rather than the members of these organizations or the larger society. Okay, so this is the changing profile of DA. So DA should be wary of these risks and it should be able to handle these challenges. Okay. Normally, these organizations should rather look at the collective interest, not just the interest of their leaders, but also the members, if I may put it like that. Okay. So if that broad basing continues, then it will contribute better to the DA. But countries where such organizations or institutions or the formalism aspect, rigs, is very diluted, eroded, then in that case DA suffers. You see, people like, who is this chap, Kenyan president, or if I take the example of Kim Jong-un, and people like them. So what happens? They haven't let the institutions and these organizations flourish and flower. So DA is, no, that is not development. That is not even development. Creating of buildings and infrastructure is not development. Right. If I talk about whole aspect, the composite aspect of development, would you call, for example, UAE, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Burj Khalifa, clean city developed? No, you won't, because the status of women is deteriorated. So I cannot call it a holistic aspect of development. So development, the profile has to be analyzed. Okay. So this is something that I wanted to point out even in the social context. Write down certain features of DA. Just the bullet points I will give. Change oriented, dynamic, non-status quoist, That means change is a cardinal value of DA. Goal oriented, anti-dogmatic and anti-conservative, client-oriented, people-centered. It is participatory, open. Then again, coordination is an essential feature because of the multiplicity of actors involved. It is ecological. Quest for efficiency, effectiveness. It is all about planned change. Planned change. ठीक है जी. Flip through the pages and let me know if there is any doubt. Friends watching us online, Saurabh, Ane, others, let me know if there is any doubt. Yes, Saurabh लिख सकते हैं. Sri Lanka's economic crisis and the effect on its bureaucracy. You can write. Okay. ये पढ़ा है? No. Anti-development thesis is a separate concept. It is not anti-development, it is the conventional development and something that is opposed to it and finding a newer ways. Criticisms of DA. The first is that, and even Professor Bhattacharya, Mohit Bhattacharya talks about it, that this distinction between DA and non-DA, that is between development and non-development administration, is artificial. Okay. Also, the second criticism is that DA, while actually emphasizes the democratic aspect a lot, rather it overemphasizes the democratic aspect, the public aspect, and underemphasizes or undermines the administrative aspect. The reverse of what we were talking about, TA and DA. Okay. हाँ वही है. I'm just consolidating at one place so that you have that in one place. Okay. So the overemphasis on the democracy or the public aspect and the underemphasis on the administration. But you see, you should come up with an anecdote with this. Anecdote is that while we are talking about overemphasizing of the democracy aspect and underemphasizing of the bureaucratic aspect or the administration aspect, this gives rise to certain questions on the idea of debureaucratization to bring about development. And there have been somewhat successful experiments on this. For example, if you look at the administration in India, you had the center and the state, and below the state you had the DC or DM, the Mai Baap of the district, the Grand Lord. Okay, so this was a TA structure. Okay, and the criticism of DA is that it is overly emphasizing on the democracy in the public and under emphasizing on the aspect of administration, and this was perceived to be a fairly good structure of administration. But we as a country, a developing country, has actually experimented with this. Why? Because of the new developments, one. Second, because of our own heritage. Village republics, Gandhian thought. Right? Even in Arthashastra, you will find the mention of small assemblies and things like that. So this emphasis on democracy, which is coming up here in the form of PRIs and urban local bodies, because DA is focusing on debureaucratization. But it has certainly not diluted the elements of administration, rather it has improved it. So this anecdote must be remembered. Now I have given you the ammunition. How to fire will depend who the enemy or the question is. Okay, understood. So this is something that you have to actually look into. So Panchayati Raj in India, the urban local bodies is again is an example where debureaucratization has enhanced the DA and not Forest Rights Act, PISA, whatever. I mean, you can include all those autonomous tribal regions and all those things. Okay. Another conceptual or rather ideological criticism that emerges is that this whole idea of DA is a facade. This idea of DA has been propagated by the societal elite to hide the inegalitarian nature of the administration and the societies. Okay. They say that the radical socio-economic transformation that we are talking about is not an administrative issue. These issues are kept alive so that people do not function. People do not actually look and check, अच्छा ये government क्या कर रही है, what this state is doing, and therefore these issues are kept alive. Okay, so that is there. Another idea is that this whole edifice of DA is because of the West. Because historically it has, so this is something which is coming up as an anti-colonial, twist. The earlier one was a Marxist twist. So link it like that. So why we are underdeveloped? Because of the fact that the West or the first world, so-called first world, has actually made us underdeveloped. Okay? So what they can do is they can be like the America. That look, you are underdeveloped. We are your big brother. We are concerned about you. Things like that. And through that, they interfere. That whole economic aid, developmental aid idea. I hope you can link that. But please understand, whenever and I always say this uh, even to the students who are very new into the public administration, that ecological approach, the ecological reality of public administration is by far the most widely accepted, most widely relatable, and most widely logical reality of public administration. So, irrespective of the criticism, the ecological reality actually dictates that the DA is something that is very wide in scope and very, very significant and indispensable. Also, the conceptual moorings of it dictate that the DA should be looked at in the socio-cultural routing where it is being practiced. It's a cultural bound nature of DA. Okay, so this cultural ecology bound nature of DA is very important. It is widespread. It covers the programs, policy, industrial development, infrastructural development, etc. It is concerned with nation building, molding of social attitudes and behaviors, bringing about social cohesion, removal of societal ills like poverty, illiteracy, furthering things like justice. Okay? Development administration is also about bridging the gap between the present and the needs of the society. It is highly ecological in nature. It is organic in nature because it does not follow a set of rigid rules and practices. It fosters democratic spirit and it exposes the myth of political administration dichotomy. Understood? So this can be a good conclusion, the way I have actually given you this. Right? Also, you can use it in various places. Okay. Now, let us shift the gears and move towards the models of DA. With respect to models, there are various models that exist, but we'll be talking about primarily Wiedner and Riggs. Okay. So let us talk about Wiedner first. He basically gives 8 different typologies. Okay, uh, based on what? Based on the fundamental aspects of his analysis is the directional growth, system change, planning. So you see, with every, I would suggest that when you use Wiedner or a particular typology of his in the answer, make a matrix of these 3 aspects because that is where the Wiedner lies. Okay, in your notes when you go back and revise and talk about which is what in that. That's going to be the small identity card of sort for that model that you can develop. Okay. So the first one is, and I'll be taking up one by one and we'll be talking about the features. Those are self-explanatory. The ideal. That is the planned directional growth with system change. Planned directional growth with system change. Now you see that the names of these models themselves will unveil the characteristics to you. Okay? They will themselves, because when you are looking at ideal, that means that the point of view is idealistic. Here, development is viewed as a continuous process. It is planned directional growth. That means direction is set for growth in modernity, nation building, socio-economic progress. All the programs are implemented to bring about the change. Differentiation and coordination are brought about necessarily to ensure that the goals are achieved. That is why you see this ideal model was something which was getting reflected in the approach of the newly independent countries after the Second World War. Almost many of them, rather majority of them, end up setting up the planning panels. We also set up the planning commission. Planned growth, direction, system change. Okay? But obviously the realization of those goals, etc., was not as it was planned. Why? Because the ability of the system to embark upon that agenda was not there. Resources were not there, training, capacity building, attitudes were not there. The bureaucracy was largely colonial, or the value standpoint of that bureaucracy was largely colonial. Therefore, you see that the actual change which was there was very limited. Also, to bring about change is not an easy task. That is why you see this model largely fall flat with very little. Yes, in isolation, some of the plans were very effective, or if they pointed out to 6, 7, आओ बड़ी जल्दी आ गए, क्लास भूल गए हैं, or the level of change was not, suppose in my plan I go about talking about 10 things, but I could only achieve a couple of things. So largely the overall in the big picture, they could not yield result. This is the first one. The second one is, जो बची हुई है वो घर जाके देखना ढंग से, है ना? The short run payoff. The short run payoff. Planned directional growth planned directional growth, pay attention, with no system change. With no system change. you see, some of the countries had the capacity or actually embarked on the process of institutional building, wherein we were talking about the system change, as in the first case. In the second case, the countries were facing difficulty in bringing about these systemic changes. So the leadership in those countries had to bring about, or the DA in those countries had to work with whatever the system that was in existence. Okay? That means you do not have to actually burn your fuel in creation of all these things. That is why you see short runoff payoff. That means that you can have a minimum investment or energies in creating those institutions. Rather, you can maximize with whatever currently you have. Okay. So also this model was seen where the leadership was not very revolutionary. So short range results, where there was little technical or foreign aid which was available. Or it is available but without any conditions. Where there is political instability. Where there is an emphasis on consumption. Now, a categorical example in this would be the ideal case of Pakistan. Okay, Pakistan. Also, you see, in case of India, with the promotion of village and cottage industry, no drastic system change was brought about. Okay, these are the examples, right? So obviously, the level of DA you would see that exponential level of DA has been achieved, or rather DA कह रहा हूँ, development has been achieved. There will be marginal gains, but there will be gains because it is a planned development within the limitations of the present system, and it gives you a lot of options. Okay, you can actually plan at national, subnational, local levels. So this gives you that flexibility. The third model is the long run payoff. Planned system change with no directional growth. With no directional growth. Okay. So basically, if we look at growth, growth is the direction towards modernity and nation building, or towards the socio-economic progress. That is going to be a short run, idea. Also, it can be acquired over the long term period. System change does not necessarily, the belief behind this is that the system change is not a guarantee for development. It is not something that you change the system and it will surely lead to develop. Rather, in turn, it might, have a counterproductive impact. Okay, that is why you see incrementalism in policy making. Because a large shake-up can have, I mean, there are studies being conducted at the moment that did demonetization lead to compromise of some basis point in our growth because of drastic policy decision. Okay, so this is the essence of it, that the system change might not lead to growth always. For example, in case of India, understand, land reforms were carried out. Did they lead to higher agricultural productivity? Okay, so that's the kind of the argument. Because you see that in various countries and the political and the social realities, the political and the administrative systems themselves alter the dynamics of such kind of DA. Okay, that is there. Then the fourth one is the failure. Failure. Planning with no growth or system change. I hope you all will be able to connect it with the changing profile of development, right? Because that is again a very important idea. This is also contributing to the changing profile of DA as well, the analysis that we have done so far through these models, etc. Right? Failure, that is planning with no growth or system change. The basis for that was that in the 60s, through the 60s, many Western economists, planners, etc. said that developmental planning is actually not leading to a lot of success to bring about development. The economic growth was not getting accelerated. Okay. And the populations were increasing. Remember, when we talk about development, we talked about the Rixian view that it should be the economic angle, that it should be able to self-sustain, but also for others. So that case was not happening. Okay. Also, in this case, Wiedner actually looks at the budget reforms to actually prove the argument that determining the failure with regards to the growth or without any major system change. Okay? And he cites the example of Vietnam in the 50s. So the budgetary function basically was taken away from the then Ministry of Finance and Foreign Aid, etc. And in place of that, a central budget agency was established. And that budgeting agency was a new agency with a dynamic, workforce, so as to say. The civil servants who were actually manning those agencies were dynamic. And they started changing the internal administration of the budget agency. And he actually, within that agency, in charge of that agency, conducted massive reorientation, retraining, reskilling programs, and new duties were assigned to those employees. He did not fire anybody. Okay, so that led to motivation amongst the employees. And when that motivation was there, okay, the budgeting as a process, because it's a part of DA. Remember, I linked it with post decor. So budgeting, the quality of the budgeting improved drastically. So the quality of the budgeting improved drastically, and comprehensive reports, programs, etc., the reporting in terms of what can be done, what is there, it improved. Okay? And very fast the changes were visible. So the limitation that only change will bring about something, nothing was there. Without any major change, that same bureaucracy working as a part of a reoriented setup worked. Right? So the theory says that the model says that the less an innovation involves the threat to the security of the employees, the more probability of it being successful. Otherwise, what will happen? There will be immediate backlash. Okay. Also, when at the top of the DA, you have a person or an individual or whosoever, an institution which is spearheading the initiative, is dynamic, innovative, he can brought about a consensual systemic change. Okay. Therefore, failure, planning with no growth of system. Next, the fifth one, environmental stimulus. Environmental stimulus, unplanned directional growth, with system change. So it's this model or this idea actually advocates a deliberate bringing up of differentiation, coordination and growth. You see, you cannot always plan the differentiation and coordination. That is the thrust, that we should let it happen in an unplanned manner. This is something that you can call as, not exactly the way Niti Aayog works, but the idea is that if you look at the planning at the large scale, it will involve, priorities, actions to be identified, policy measures, and then implementation tools will be needed to bring things to change. Okay, and it makes the planning very difficult and cumbersome. It makes the planning a logistical nightmare. Much of the energies of the system gets into the planning for planning rather than actually bringing about the change.
One more planning is not fully related with the changes or required.
can be unrealistic. I give to you that the planning can be unrealistic, but the entire process of the formalization of the planning, especially as it existed in a large and diverse geography like India, it is a logistical nightmare. And there might be a nationwide, a quest or a nationwide demand or aspiration for certain development goals. Indicative planning, yes, but it is not unplanned. Indicative planning is not, unplanned directional growth. You identify areas and there you, adopt the mechanism and tools. No, the idea is that it is an unplanned directional growth because the edifice of the argument is that the planned process is so cumbersome. Okay, so there can be, a nationwide resistance or a backlash to a particular change, and the idea that such development politics base of this development administration must be secure in power as well as the task. So while the central idea that okay, we will plan, we will bring about the changes, yes, they can work to a limited extent. Largely, you will see that it will boil down to an individual minister, bureaucrats, or some individual institution. Okay. So here Widner says that most of these changes which are being talked about actually come from the society itself. How the leadership actually reacts to those changes is something which is there. So that is why you see it is the environmental stimulus. We are not looking at the government or the state alone. We are looking at the environmental stimulus, the backlash, the demand, whatever it is coming. Okay. But what can be done is that to cope up with these changes, the changes within the DA, within the administration, they can be planned through reorientation, through training, new processes, etc. But remember, these changes can be perceived as generic. They may not be perceived by the members of the bureaucracy to be aligned with something related to development. Okay, so that is there. Next is sixth. Yes, it's called pragmatism. Pragmatism, unplanned directional growth with no system change. Unplanned directional growth with no system change. So what is the characteristic feature? Little change in differentiation and coordination with the decentralized initiative, competition, adoption and emulation. You will see this is something which is there in the liberalizing regimes. It does not need a lot of planning, especially in countries which are facing multitude of problems, for example, illiteracy, poor health, diseases, social problems. In such countries, it is best that the unplanned direction is there and the system is not changed. It is the pragmatism. Next is the crisis. Crisis. Unplanned system change with no directional growth. Unplanned system change with no directional growth. So this unplanned change largely comes from the decentralized initiatives. Okay, competition, adaptation, etc. So it leads to a systemic change where the system changes in a substantial form, but there is no direction of that change. So it's an informal systemic change. For example, if there are natural emergencies, war is there, international or civic shocks is there, okay? And therefore, the crisis require the on-spot adjustments. You do not have that sort of a luxury to actually look at stuff because by that time, more damage will happen. Next is, and the last is, static society. That would mean no plan, no change. No plan, no change. So there are societies where you will find that there is no plan, nothing is changed, they are stagnant in a manner. Okay. Or very small pockets of change as well as the pocket of resistance will be there. In spite of the favorable circumstances for change, there will not be much changes. Okay, and that is something which is there. For example, you can talk about North Korea and places like that. Okay. I hope you understand that this model is for the academic study. We cannot say that 100% this model fits there. In the case of India, only we saw that how in case of MSME, Planning Commission and other stuff, various models are fitting in. But as a part of the academic inquiry, this helps us. Okay. Next, when we look at the rigs, the models that are there for rigs, the prismatic sala, etc., you just have to interpret those models in light of the development discourse. So that becomes Rigsian, view of development. Okay, understood? Where he talks about prismatic society, this society, that society. That is there. But make sure the way you express it should be in terms of the language of the DA and not the CPA. Right? While giving due credit to Riggs that okay, he is one of the foremost scholars of the CPA and through his studies on CPA, he talks about DA. One more thing that I want to highlight and additionally give, which is not very commonly available, is about the Montgomerys. John D. Montgomery. Okay. Again, a multifaceted scholar who contributed to policy analysis, comparative policy analysis, international relations, economic development, and whatnot. He was a Ford Foundation professor of international studies in Harvard, right, and many other accolades. He was also a key member of the comparative analysis group. Okay, and he talks about DA and the problems related to it. And it is Montgomery who, in a way, suggests that the administrative systems should actually function as per the local needs. Okay, so he is actually Montgomery is actually looked at as a major critique of the Riggsian idea. You see, Riggs talks about overlapping. That means the old and the new basically exist simultaneously. Riggsian analysis actually do not go into a lot of details when it comes to the overlapping. He says that there are duplicating, and Montgomery says that Riggs fail to actually accommodate the idea of duplicating functions, wherein the old administration, the old bureaucracy is put in a competitive position or is bypassed altogether. A good example of this would be the semi-public corporations, PSUs. They are also the bureaucracy work, but you bring in some amount of autonomy, right? And see their performance. The same ONGC. Riggs mentioned overlapping, but he says that the overlapping that Riggs mentions is very simplistic. He is not getting into the details of it. And he is criticizing the way Riggs is actually posing. See, Riggs is. Hello, sir. I have it, sir. I have it. Thank you so much, sir. No problem, sir. No problem. I think the students will be really honored to meet you. So, Himanshu sir is one of the most senior members of our academic staff. I believe yes. Okay. So what is happening here is that if you look how the Riggs mention overlapping, Riggs says, and understand this difference. Basically, overlapping is what? That the old and new exist simultaneously. Riggs is looking at this kind of overlapping. That old and new both are in operation. But he says, Montgomery says, the way you look at it, like semi-public corporations, wherein you have the overlapping is there, the same bureaucracy is there, but the way it operates somewhat changes. That can actually motivate the bureaucracy and also not sacrifice control, at the altar of this efficiency or this newfound zeal in the bureaucracy. And this helps in development of controlled yet effective non-government entities. Okay, so this is how Montgomery is actually looking at the overlapping aspect. Similarly, he criticizes the use of foreign aid as part of the foreign policy to bring about the development. Because he says that such aid aspect actually ignored a lot of details of the aid receiving countries. So, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, even till 80s, US was giving huge aid without actually, I mean, it was funding practically everybody. One of the champions of the so-called democracy was willing to do business with any oligarch. Look at the monarchies it funded in the Arab region. Even Pakistan, right, where in my last memory, the proper democratic transition happens when Nawaz Sharif gets voted out and Imran Khan comes in. So imagine, the point is this, that it was willing to do business with anybody and everybody, and that is what seems problematic. Okay. So the analysis of Montgomery, Riggs, Wiedner, they are important. With regards to changing profile of development, there is this homework. Homework is that with regards to changing profile of development, anything, beg, borrow, steal, okay, get it from anywhere, look on net. I want you to study this. Two strands. The first one is the conceptual and theoretical strand. What was happening when the comparative administration group, advisory groups, etc. were formed? What were the contexts that were dominating it? The second one is the practical manifestation. Context. For example, sometimes the environmental context will dominate, sometimes the technical context will dominate. Okay, for example, in 60s we saw the forming of CAG. With the 90s and later the contemporary DA it's having a different characteristics. Okay, so there is no word limit. There is no word limit for this, but I want you to develop an exhaustive list along with examples so that you revise it, because it is here where we will plug and play every other thing: gender, environment, technology, and other stuff. Because the questions on the changing profile of development, they are very important. For example, and we'll have a look at some of the PYQs from the changing profile of development. Let me just filter it. Please understand. Ethnocentric view is something that we have talked about. The West was looking during the CPA discussion on CPA. Okay. Now the question says, and this is 2018 20 marker. How does ethnocentrism impact DA in achieving sustainable goals? Simple question. So देखो मजा आएगा, खेलो इसके साथ, play with it. Ethnocentrism, and through these I will discuss these questions, but the homework is yours. Okay, 4-5 pages, good, with diagrams, everything I need it. Okay, ethnocentrism impacts DA. In achieving sustainable development goals. How does ethnocentrism impact DA in achieving sustainable development goals? Argue with examples. Right? Ethnocentrism would mean what? looking through the lens of their own. In a way, what I think is right, what you think does not matter, or anything that is contrary to what I think is incorrect. So the ethnocentricist view was largely, if we look at PA, DA, everything, was largely was the Western view. Whereas the localized or the cultural or the ecological view was the view which was according to different countries, different geographies, different conditions. Okay, so ethnocentrism impact DA what? Because what they consider as development is development. What they consider as non-development is non-development. And based on that, they say that somebody is developed, somebody is not developed. So now imagine, I mean, there are communities, tribal communities, who live in harmony with the nature in a far more, I mean, they have a negative carbon footprint. So, do I call myself developed or they are developed? Right. So, the point is this ethnocentrism actually, when we are looking at SDGs, and this is the contemporary part, the practical orientation part which is there. So SDGs are about what? Poverty, this, that. Here you can involve the example of Bhutan, for example, not looking at growth or indices from the financial point of view or just from the numbers. Happiness, satisfaction. So when you talk about these SDGs, please remember the knowledge of SDGs will come in handy in the what is poverty, education, health for all, etc. Yes. Yes, that is what we have to argue, that the ethnocentric view of DA might not be might not be the entire view. One might not be entirely correct, but it impacts DA because DA largely the moorings of DA will be judged from this ethnocentric view. That is why it says argue with examples. So you have to present both sides of the coin to an extent where it is right. For example, with regards to human rights, it is right. The sort of primitive cultures have a very distorted notion or a very vulgar notion of justice. For example, hanging somebody by the pole is considered fine. We saw in Iran recently, right? So it says argue with examples. So we will have to talk about what is right with the ethnocentric view, but the lack of ecological and socio-cultural relevance of the ethnocentrism make it partially incorrect. Okay, so these aspects will be highlighted. When you look at changing profile of development, these issues, questions like these are getting asked. Sample this, another question. Markets, hierarchies and networks represent modern governing structures in government. Markets, hierarchies and networks. Now understand what it is saying. You can also tag this question with unit 1. Markets, hierarchies means bureaucracy, some institution, that is state. Markets, hierarchies, networks. And this network. Represent modern governing structures in government. Herein, you will be using the contracting out philosophy. So, we will have to treat this question both from inside as well as from the outside. Okay, and use the analogies of development administration, the TA and DA that we were initially talking about. So, it's not easy. I mean, lag raha hai aasan hai, but the point is in the heat of the examination, it gets difficult. So the changing profile of development you have to analyze from conceptual academic lens, from the practical lens as well as the contextual lens that it is working. Next. Obviously this is governance paradigm. But can you directly put, okay, this is governance paradigm, khatam, write the definition? No, obviously you'll have to justify it. Okay, next. (2022) a 10 marker. DA embraces array of new functions assumed by developing countries. DA embraces array of new functions assumed by developing countries. Explain. Here, don't you think the models of Riggs and Wiedner will come handy? The ones we have discussed. To actually uplift the level. The argument will remain the same. That how DA in India might be getting increasingly concerned with different functions. अब एक बात बताइए, कुंभ का मेला हो रहा है, there is a कुंभ, you know, why is the state government concerned about it? Or why is Sabrimala issue going to the courts? Because this is DA, social, cultural, every aspect it is touching. And in a developing country, due to the complexities, due to the prismatic elements, you will have to take them up. So this is the conceptual justification. How?
Suppose using websites and different ways to develop in kind of development, in law and order situation.
No, I mean that would be too far fetched. Law and order situations are always always the situations of urgency and contingency. There you cannot have a very in real terms you cannot have you can have SOPs. That is where the ethnocentric part probably you are referring to. But that is the only, because see, if I am seeing an impending law and order situation, right, my ideal way would be to restore peace rather than fiddle with it, that it might improve. No, at times I have to use the domination, the ethnocentrism that you are talking about, though not a very, because it will take a hell lot of effort to explain the ethnocentrism that you are referring to. So don't use it. Okay, I understand what you mean, but in the examination for you to convey this, it will be a big problem. Okay, so they assume an array of new functions, especially in developing countries because of the complexity. So it's a simple thing. Then you will have to analyze the changing profile of DA in terms of role expansion and role diversification of DA.
When talking about these new functions, can we also consider the emerging issues which are global in nature? And then
Obviously.
expand them to
Obviously.
now DA has to also involve coordination.
Obviously. You can do it. Okay, friends watching this online, any queries? I'll talk one more about this. Okay, Anya wants to ask something. Idea, so how we can use these models of Wiedner while writing answers, what type of question in what context? Anya, I guess I'm precisely giving that, wherein the models of Wiedner, Riggs, etc. Will be used. I hope you're getting that. I guess that answers your question. Anya? Right. Okay. So that was the idea. I deliberately saved the questions for the last. Okay, अब समझ में आ गया ना, ठीक है. Okay. Next question. See how conceptual it is. It was asked just this year, 2023, the previous year. In explaining the development, Wiedner made a distinction between, and that is why I took up Wiedner's model. Okay, 2023 they asked Wiedner. In explaining the development, Wiedner made a distinction between change in the output and change in the system itself, and warned that what is growth from one point of view may be decline from another. भाई क्या बात कर रहा है वीडनर? वीडनर इज टॉकिंग अबाउट डायरेक्शन, चेंज, वेदर इट इज प्लान्ड और नॉट. उसी पे तो ये 8 मॉडल थे. उसी पर तो थे ना ये 8 मॉडल. stagnation, static model, etc. model. He's talking about one or two models. Remember, while discussing one model, I talked about that how it can lead to have a negative consequences when we bring about a drastic systemic change. So things like that. Go through the profile of the models, you will get the answer. That it will lead to growth. Remember, we talked about Vietnam where little change was brought about, nobody was fired, just the relearning, etc. happened. So in answering these questions, there is this hunch. Okay, I'm not a prophet, I'm not a predictor, nor we are in the business of predicting the examination. Since from the abstract nature, the UPSC is moving towards these models. So they have asked this guy, Bittner, right? So they might allude to Riggs or Montgomery or somebody, or at least if not directly the scholar, but they might pick up a strand from their thesis. And that is why I thought as part of the advanced session, it is pertinent that we take up these models. Because often these models are not taken up in the DA. DA is just explained like that for most of the people out there. Okay. So this is regarding the changing profile of development. Okay. Next is anti-development thesis. I hope you all know that it is not against development, it is a different way of going about it. I have given one homework with regards to the ideas that are there, and I have asked you to make a note sheet of it. Okay. With regards to the bureaucracy and the development argument, we have discussed the TA and DA aspect. That leaves us with strong state versus market debate, the idea of impact of liberalization, privatization and globalization that we have exhaustively already covered. Huh. Yes, yes. You see, these things, bureaucracy versus democracy, bureaucracy versus development. Right. सब भाई बहन है, cousins है. No, the approach will be similar. You see, whenever you write a paper 1, paper 2 answer, there are two kind of interlinkages. One is between them and the other is between them. Like we link DA, CPA, NPA and all these things, that is this curve. The way we were linking civil services, Kautilya and others, that was this curve. Now, while you are writing public administration paper 1 answer, that is paper 1, administrative theory. So, the heavy component should be of paper 1. Even if the question is contemporary in nature, then a dash of it would be that contemporary part and a small subset of this would be paper 2. This part gets reversed here. A majority of it would be paper 2, India specific, India related things, etc. And here that's a glimpse that we are somehow anchoring it to administrative theory. In this, there would be that, okay, this is the theory, but this is the practical manifestation. So this should be the outlook while we write the answers. Okay, clear? With regards to strong state versus market debate, again, it is largely related to the idea of governance, good governance, liberalism, all those things are there. With regards to women SHGs, etc., I guess I have given enough fodder with regards to how you need to treat this. The standard material is available and I do not want you to actually get unnecessarily into it. One idea that I want you to actually go into is the idea of foreign aid and developmental funding. Right. So the second exercise is that with regards to foreign aid and developmental funding, develop a note sheet wherein you are talking about microfinance, Grameen Bank kind of an initiative, foreign aid, what is good, what is bad about it, okay, things like that. GS2 में तो पार्ट है ही ना ये. डेवलपमेंट GS2 में, GS2 के अंदर there's a head development process and development industry, donor agencies, etc., etc. So you will get the hint here. Now the whole argument of me giving this exercise is that I know all of you have that GS understanding. How can you make it pabadish based on what we have done? Okay. See, I do not say that all of you will be spot on and all of you will make like excellent note sheets. But for me, the solace lies in the part that you will go through this exercise, so at least your brain will work in these lines. Okay, so this is the exercise that I want you to do. All right. So with this, let's end today's session. Okay. You have the weekend to actually, go about this. Do it nicely. Okay. Any queries are there? I hope all of you are added to the group. You are not. Once you go downstairs after this, ask them tell them that you are a PubMed advanced student, and I have asked you to be added to the WhatsApp group. Okay. So do that. Before we part our ways, just for the day, just flip through the portions and let me know if there's something that might trouble you. Friends watching us online can also do that and let me know, and then we'll bid bye bye for today. आ रह गए थे मंडे को शेड्यूल नहीं देखा. हाँ वो वैसे. Because the point is that I want to keep a uniform channel for everybody, though you can hand it over to me here, but the point is I want a uniform channel so that everything remains in sync, and those copies will get registered also in the system. Okay. All right, no doubts then. Okay then, bye bye, take care, all the best, stay healthy during this period, it's crucial. ठीक है, बाकी पढ़ते रहिए. Thank you.